I'm not sure why I'm sharing this, but maybe it will help someone. Looking back, it still feels surreal, and sometimes I can't believe how much my life changed in such a short time. It all started in February 2018, when I found out about my wife, Emily's affair. We'd been married for 3.5 years at that point. It's strange how everything can seem perfect even when it isn't. I had a job that required a fair amount of travel, and it was something I'd always been used to. I wasn't home every night, but I could manage to work from home on the days I wasn't away. Emily, on the other hand, had a high-powered job at a tech firm. She worked long hours, and as she moved up the corporate ladder, her hours grew longer. Despite the strain of our busy schedules, I still believed we had a solid marriage. Sure, we argued over things, her late hours, my traveling, but nothing seemed beyond fixing. At least that's what I thought. I still remember the first time we met 5 years ago. It was at a cookout hosted by some mutual friends. I had just come off a tough year, and there she was, beautiful, articulate, and someone who seemed to notice me. I wasn't the type to attract someone like her, but something about us clicked. I could hardly believe she was interested in me. For the next few weeks, we couldn't get enough of each other. Things moved fast, and within 18 months we were married. We were doing well, at least I thought we were. We had moved into a spacious apartment and were saving for a house. But after the first 3 years of marriage, things started to shift. Emily's work took up more and more of her time, and our intimacy dwindled. I still loved her, but I couldn't help but notice how things were changing. Her late nights at the office became more frequent, and when I'd try to talk about it, she'd get defensive, saying it was all necessary for her career. It was almost as though she couldn't see the strain it was putting on me. But I tried to be understanding, tried to see it from her perspective. It wasn't just the late nights. The more time passed, the more I felt like she was slipping away. Our physical relationship became almost non-existent. Every time I tried to get close, I was met with rejection. I tried to ignore it, telling myself she was just exhausted from work, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Still, I didn't have proof. I couldn't put my finger on it, so I chose to brush it aside. Things came to a head in the fall of 2017. It had been another late night for her at the office, and I was home, left to my own thoughts. Emily had been using our spare bedroom as a home office, and I'd noticed her spending more and more time there. I didn't think much of it at first, but then came a moment I couldn't ignore. One evening, after Emily returned from work, she was in a hurry. She mentioned she had to meet some colleagues at a local bar. She didn't even ask if I wanted to join her, which was unusual. I had grown used to this pattern, her excusing herself to meet people after work. But that night, I noticed something that set off a sinking feeling in my stomach. I went to help her with the grocery bag she had brought home, and that's when I saw it. Beneath the passenger seat of her car, partially visible, was a pink bra. It wasn't just any bra, it was hers. The one she always wore when she was in the mood. The one she loved the most. I knew it immediately. I didn't say anything. I simply carried the bags into the house, pretending nothing had happened. But my heart was racing and I could barely breathe. I had just seen a sign, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I wanted to confront her, to ask, but I didn't. I kept my cool, or at least I tried to. I told myself I was overthinking it, that I was being paranoid. But deep down I knew. The question was, what should I do next? That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the image of the bra, the odd distance between us, and how everything just seemed to have shifted so suddenly. I decided I had to find out the truth, no matter how hard it was going to be. The following evening I planned something special. I spent hours preparing a nice dinner, setting the table with candles, flowers, and her favorite wine. I wanted to get her attention, to make things right. But when she came home, it was clear she wasn't interested. She apologized briefly, saying she had to meet her coworkers at a neighborhood bar. She promised to have a quick snack before she left, but I could see the indifference in her eyes. That was the tipping point. I had had enough. I couldn't take being ignored any longer. As she showered, I grabbed my work phone and threw it in the back seat of her car. When she came out, I made a point of telling her that I wasn't happy. She got upset, of course, but there was no real apology. She still had no idea how badly I'd been hurt. The next day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I followed her, hoping to catch her in the act, or at least find some evidence. I watched from across the street as she walked out of the bar with a man. He was tall, well-dressed, someone from her company, I assumed. They kissed, and I watched in shock as they drove off together. I knew then what I had to do. My entire world shattered in that moment, and there was no going back. After witnessing my wife, Emily, kiss another man, I was in a state of shock. I didn't know what to feel: anger, sadness, disbelief. But above all, I felt numb. I didn't want to confront her right then. The whole situation felt surreal. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, my mind racing with questions that had no answers. How could this happen? Why didn't I see the signs sooner? I had known something was off, but I never imagined this. I found a quiet bar about 30 miles outside the city and parked my car. The bartender was a friendly woman, someone who had seen a lot of people walk in lost and broken. I don't know why I started talking to her, but it felt like I needed to. I needed to tell someone, and for some reason she was the person I chose. She asked me what had been bothering me, and I couldn't hold it in anymore. I explained the situation to her, how Emily had been distant, working long hours, and how I had caught her in the act of cheating. As I spoke, I expected her to offer some advice or maybe some comforting words, but instead, she said something that hit me harder than anything else. "You're not alone, buddy," she said, giving me a pat on the back. "I've been through something like this before. You've got two options now. You can let this destroy you, or you can take this as an opportunity to turn things around. Your life can go either way from here. It's completely up to you." Her words stayed with me. She was right in a way. I could spiral into anger, resentment, and revenge, or I could walk away and start over. I didn't want to destroy myself, so I chose to try and find a way out. I wasn't sure how to do it, but I knew I had to leave. I had to get away from Emily. I couldn't be in the same house with her after what I had seen, after what she had done. The next few days were a blur. I didn't talk to her much, and she didn't seem to notice my distance. It was like we were both pretending that nothing had changed, even though everything had. I could feel the tension in the air. She was still going out on her business trips, leaving me behind in the empty apartment. I found myself avoiding her, not because I didn't want to talk, but because I was too afraid of what I would say to her. I didn't know how to confront her yet, and part of me wasn't sure if I even wanted to. I had already seen enough. It was then that I remembered a conversation I had had with Ray, the man I met at the bar. He had offered me the chance to stay at his property. It seemed like a perfect escape, a way to get out of the city, clear my mind, and start over. I hadn't planned on taking him up on his offer, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt like the right choice. I decided to visit Ray's ranch. He had a small cabin and a trailer that he was willing to rent out to me for a very reasonable price. It wasn't much, but it was a place where I could escape the mess that my life had become. I wanted out, and this was the chance to do it. When I got to Ray's ranch, I was surprised by how peaceful it was. The property was beautiful, surrounded by trees and mountains. The trailer was small, but it had everything I needed. There was a part of me that felt guilty for even considering it. After all, I was leaving my wife, the woman I had loved and built a life with. But the other part of me knew that I couldn't stay in a relationship that had been broken by infidelity. Ray made me feel comfortable, like I wasn't alone in this. He had been through a similar experience, and he understood the pain I was feeling. He showed me around the property and talked about the freedom he had found after leaving his own troubled relationship. His words were encouraging, and I found myself starting to think that maybe this wasn't the end, but rather the beginning of something new. The next few days were a whirlwind of packing and planning. I couldn't bear to stay in our apartment any longer. I started quietly moving my things into the trailer. Emily was still out, working late as usual. I didn't tell her what I was doing. I didn't owe her an explanation. In a way, I had already made my decision. I was leaving her, and nothing she could say would change that. But she didn't make it easy for me. As the days went by, she began to notice the changes. She started asking questions, but I didn't give her any answers. I could see the confusion in her eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth yet. I wasn't ready. Then one night, as she was getting ready for another work outing, I finally snapped. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I had reached my breaking point. When she asked me where I was going, I replied, "I'm going out with some friends. You wouldn't enjoy it." Her expression shifted, but she didn't press the issue. She just muttered something under her breath and left. As she walked out the door, I stood there, knowing that I had made my choice. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. I didn't need to justify my decision to anyone. The marriage was over. She had made her bed, and now I was walking away from it. The next morning, she tried to talk to me, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I had already made my mind up. I had already started packing my things. Emily was gone from my life, and I was going to be better for it. The day I decided to leave felt like a strange mix of liberation and regret. Emily had no idea what was coming. I had been moving things out of the apartment in small batches for a few days now, and by the time she was finally away for one of her work trips, I was nearly ready. All I needed was to take the final steps to cut the ties completely. I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront her right away. I wasn't going to allow her the chance to make excuses, to explain things away. She had made her choice, and I had to make mine. The way she had treated me, the lies, the betrayal, it was all too much to forgive. Her actions spoke louder than any apology ever could. I could no longer be in the same space as her. When she was gone, I had the apartment to myself for the last time. I walked through the rooms, looking at the familiar surroundings. The place that had once been filled with laughter, love, and promise now seemed empty. Every corner of the apartment had been touched by our time together. Our first home as a married couple, the place where we'd shared our hopes and dreams. It now felt like a prison. As I packed up my things, I couldn't help but think back to all the little moments that led to this point. Our first date, our wedding day, the honeymoon. For a while, everything had seemed perfect. She had been everything I wanted. She had been my partner in every sense of the word. But somewhere along the way things had shifted. And I missed all the signs. I missed them because I trusted her, and trusting her was my biggest mistake. I could still feel the weight of my decision, but I knew I couldn't stay. The thought of living another day in that apartment, under the same roof as her, was unbearable. I had to leave. I had to escape, and the only way to do that was to sever ties completely. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. When I walked out of the apartment for the last time, I felt lighter, but at the same time I felt hollow. The air outside felt fresher, somehow as if I was breathing for the first time in months. But the emptiness inside me remained. As I drove away, I could still feel the echoes of the life we had built together. I couldn't deny the history, the memories. But I also couldn't deny the way she had torn it all apart. She didn't just betray me, she destroyed the foundation of everything we had worked for. I arrived at Ray's property with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. The trailer wasn't much, but it was mine. It was a place where I could breathe, where I could clear my mind and figure out what came next. I wasn't sure if I was ready to be alone yet, but I knew it was better than staying in a place filled with reminders of my broken marriage. Ray had set up the trailer for me, and when I stepped inside, I was surprised at how cozy it felt. It wasn't luxurious by any means, but it had everything I needed. A small kitchen, a comfortable bed, and a living space that made me feel like I could breathe again. I didn't need anything more. I didn't want anything more. The first few days in the trailer were a blur. I spent most of my time trying to sort through my emotions. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed by the weight of what I had done. I had walked away from my wife, from everything I thought I knew. But there were other moments when I felt truly at peace for the first time in months. The quiet of the countryside, the stillness of the mountains, it was exactly what I needed. It gave me space to think, to process, and to heal. But the peace didn't last forever. A few days after I settled into the trailer, Emily reached out to me. At first, it was just a text message asking where I was. She said she was concerned about me and wanted to talk. I didn't respond. I couldn't bring myself to. The thought of hearing her voice, of dealing with her excuses again, was more than I could handle. A few days later, she tried calling me. I ignored the call. And then came the emails. She started pleading with me, telling me how sorry she was, how much she regretted what she had done. She tried to explain the affair away, to make me believe that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. She claimed that the man from her work, the one I had seen her with at the hotel, had manipulated her. She blamed him for everything, but I didn't believe her. I couldn't. The more she begged, the more I became convinced that nothing she said could make it right. I spent a lot of time thinking about what I wanted. I wanted to be free of her, but I also wanted closure. I wanted to know why she did it, why she thought this affair would solve whatever problems she thought we had. I wanted to understand, but I didn't think I ever would. The betrayal was too deep. One evening, a week after I left, Emily texted me one last time. She told me that she had spoken to her lawyer and was going to file for divorce. She said she would make it as easy as possible for me. She even apologized again, saying she regretted everything that had happened. But it didn't matter. I was done. I had made my decision, and there was nothing she could say that would change that. The divorce proceedings were quick. I signed the papers without hesitation, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. I was free. I was no longer tied to her, to the life we had built together. The divorce was final, and that chapter of my life was over. And just like that, I was alone. But this time it felt different. It wasn't loneliness that plagued me, it was freedom. It was the freedom to move on, to rebuild my life in a way that was truly mine. It was the freedom to choose my own path without anyone else's influence. As I stood there looking at the divorce papers, I realized something. I wasn't just leaving Emily behind. I was leaving the person I had been in that relationship. I was shedding the skin of who I thought I was and embracing who I was meant to be. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was starting to become whole again. The days after the divorce were like a blur. The world felt new, but at the same time, the emptiness of the past lingered. I had moved to a quieter place, a humble trailer set on raised land, far from the city, far from the painful memories of my marriage. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No reminders of the life I had with Emily, just the soft sounds of the wind and the rustling of leaves. I had a lot of time to reflect. At first, I thought the quiet would drive me crazy. I had been used to the constant hum of the city, the noise, the people. But out here in the mountains it was different. It was peaceful, and that peace, though initially unsettling, eventually began to work its way into my soul. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was being pulled in 1,000 directions. There was no pressure, no pretense, just a chance to breathe. Ray checked in on me every few days. He was a quiet man, but his kindness had made a lasting impact on me. He would bring me small things. Fresh eggs from his chickens, a couple of beers, even a new set of work gloves when he saw me fixing the trailer. I had no real plans at first, no direction. I knew I couldn't stay here forever, but the thought of returning to my old life felt impossible. I threw myself into routine. In the mornings, I would go for runs along the trails near Ray's property. The physical exertion helped clear my mind. It wasn't about pushing myself to be in better shape, it was about finding clarity. The repetitive motion of running gave me the time to think, to sort through the tangled mess of emotions I still felt. With every step, I felt a little more like myself again. But even with all the fresh air and physical exercise, healing wasn't easy. There were days when the pain of my marriage, of Emily's betrayal, came rushing back all at once. I'd be sitting quietly working on a project or cooking dinner, and the grief would hit me like a wave. I'd remember her touch, the way she looked at me before everything fell apart. I'd think about the life we had planned together, the house we wanted, the future we had dreamed of. And then I'd remember her betrayal, and it would all come crashing down again. What made it harder was the realization that she hadn't even tried to understand the pain she caused me. She didn't seem to comprehend how deeply her actions had affected me. Every apology she sent was wrapped in excuses, blaming everything from her work stress to her need for validation. She even blamed me for not being around enough. But I wasn't the one who cheated. I wasn't the one who broke the trust. She had done that. And yet, it felt like she couldn't fully acknowledge it. I started to realize that my path forward wasn't going to be about fixing things with her. It wasn't about trying to go back to what we once had. There was no going back. What had happened between us, the affair, the lies, it had all been an irreversible betrayal. The only way to move forward was to heal on my own terms, to rebuild my life with a foundation of trust in myself, not in someone else. Months passed and I began to make new memories. I met new people. None of them were romantic interests, not yet, but just people who understood what I was going through. Race friends, a few people in the nearby town. I began to open up more, to allow myself to have casual conversations, to enjoy the simple things in life again. The quiet of the mountains, the joy of a meal with good company, the comfort of being in a place where I didn't have to pretend. There were times when Emily would try to contact me again. After her initial barrage of texts and emails, she had fallen silent for a while. But eventually she started reaching out in small ways. At first, it was just a text asking how I was doing. Then it became emails, filled with regret and pleas for reconciliation. She said she missed me, said she had made a huge mistake, and that she wanted to try again. But the more I read those messages, the more I realized I was no longer the person who would have listened. I wasn't the man who would have forgiven her, who would have tried to pick up the pieces of a broken marriage. That man was gone. He had been replaced by someone who was stronger, someone who understood that the best way to heal was to let go. I didn't respond to her at first, but eventually I decided to meet her. I agreed to sit down with her at a coffee shop, of all places. It wasn't the most ideal setting, but it felt like a neutral ground, a place where we could talk without the pressure of being in the same room we had shared for so long. When I saw her, the familiar pang of emotion hit me. She looked just the same as I remembered, beautiful, polished, and yet broken in a way that I hadn't expected. I could see the guilt in her eyes, the way she had aged in just a few months, the strain of knowing she had lost everything. We sat down at a small table and she immediately started apologizing. She said she was sorry for everything she had done. She said she regretted cheating, that she had never meant to hurt me. She even told me she had broken up with the man she had been seeing, but I wasn't interested in her excuses. I wasn't interested in hearing what she had to say. Not anymore. I had been listening to her for too long, and it hadn't done me any good. I told her I was done. I told her there was no going back, that I couldn't trust her anymore, and that there was no future for us. It was hard to say those words, but I knew it was the only thing I could do. It was the only way to protect myself and my future. When I walked out of that coffee shop, I felt lighter. I had said everything I needed to say, and for the first time, I felt like I was in control of my life again. The healing wasn't over, not by a long shot, but I had taken another step toward reclaiming who I was. The time I spent in the trailer on Ray's property had been both an escape and a sanctuary. I had gone there to get away from the hurt, to let the weight of my marriage's collapse settle somewhere far away from me. It worked to an extent. For the first time in years, I was no longer bound by the emotional chaos that had come with being tied to someone who had betrayed me. The air was fresh and the silence was comforting, a balm for my troubled heart. The first few months were strange. I found myself on a path I hadn't planned for. I had no clear vision of what my future would look like, only the vague sense that I needed to do something different, something that would allow me to feel like I was in control again. The days blurred together in a comforting way, with routine being my lifeline. I would wake up early, go for a run on the nearby trails, then spend the rest of the day either working remotely or fixing up the trailer. The simple acts of living, of tending to my new life, gave me a sense of peace that I hadn't known in years. Ray had been more than just a landlord to me. He had become a good friend, someone who offered me a different perspective on life. He would pop by every so often, always bringing something, fresh vegetables, a new tool, or just a bottle of whiskey for the nights when things felt too heavy. His way of life was simple, and I found myself respecting it more as time passed. He had never married, never settled down, but there was a quiet satisfaction in his life that I envied. He worked hard, but he lived on his terms, without the weight of commitments that didn't align with his needs. He had created a life that made sense to him. Over the months, I began to feel stronger. I started getting out more, meeting new people, even going to a few local events in the small town nearby. The more I explored this new chapter of my life, the more I realized how much I had been holding back during my marriage. I had been so consumed by the belief that I was supposed to be a certain way for Emily that I had forgotten what it meant to just be myself. Now, in this quiet corner of the world, I was rediscovering who I was, beyond the man who had once been a part of a broken relationship. It was during one of these outings that I met someone new. Her name was Rachel. She was a few years younger than me but shared a similar love for the outdoors and a simple, laid-back lifestyle. We met when I stopped to help her change a flat tire while I was out for a run. The moment we started talking, there was an immediate connection. She was down to earth, funny, and genuinely kind. She didn't try to impress me or put on a facade. She was simply herself, and I found that refreshing. We started spending more time together. At first, it was just casual, going for hikes, grabbing coffee at the local cafe, talking about life. There were no heavy expectations, no pressure to be anything we weren't. Rachel didn't know the full extent of my past, and I hadn't yet shared the details of my marriage, but there was something in her presence that made me feel safe, like I could just be Paul again. In the back of my mind, I was still hesitant. The scars from my marriage, from Emily's affair, were still fresh. I hadn't completely healed, and the thought of letting someone new into my life felt both exciting and terrifying. I wasn't sure if I was ready to move on from the past, to open myself up to the possibility of love again. But as I spent more time with Rachel, I realized that I wasn't rushing into anything. We were both taking our time, allowing the connection to unfold naturally. One evening, after a long day of hiking, we sat by the fire at her cabin. The night was clear, and the stars seemed brighter out here than I had ever seen them in the city. We talked about everything and nothing, the kind of conversation that happens when you're with someone who makes you feel at ease. It was during that moment that I realized something. I wasn't running away from the past anymore. I was simply moving forward. And Rachel was part of that new path. But even as I began to rebuild, there were still moments when the past crept up on me. I would be sitting in the quiet of my trailer or working on some project, and memories of Emily would flood my mind. I'd remember the way she looked at me before everything fell apart, the way she promised me that we would always be together. The betrayal still stung. There were times when I wondered if I would ever be able to trust again, if the scars from my marriage would ever truly heal. But what I realized over time was that healing wasn't about forgetting. It wasn't about pretending the pain didn't exist. It was about learning to live with it, to acknowledge it, and to move forward anyway. I wasn't perfect. There were still days when I felt angry, when I questioned my decisions, when I missed the life I had planned with Emily. But the difference now was that I had the tools to cope. I had learned to focus on what I could control, my own actions, my own peace, my own future. I couldn't control what happened in the past, but I could choose how I responded to it. In the months that followed, Rachel and I grew closer. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but it was steady. She was patient with me, understanding when I needed space, but also there when I was ready to talk. I had learned to communicate differently, to express my needs in a way that wasn't clouded by the past. And that was something I had never done in my marriage with Emily. I realized that my relationship with Rachel, though new, was built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself becoming a different person. Not someone defined by the pain of the past, but someone who had learned from it. I was no longer the man who had been trapped in a marriage where trust had been shattered. I was someone who had faced the darkest parts of my life and emerged stronger. I didn't need to forget the past, but I didn't have to let it control me anymore. I was learning to live again, and this time I was doing it on my terms. And that was the greatest gift I could give myself. It's been a little over a year since I first left my marriage and moved to Ray's trailer. A year since I discovered the painful truth about Emily's affair, a truth that completely shattered everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and commitment. I've come a long way since then, and the man I am today is very different from the man I was when I first arrived at that lonely spot in the hills. The peace I sought in that secluded space, far from the life I had once known, has grown into a deeper understanding of myself and my needs. I've realized that the time I spent alone, away from the chaos of city life and the hurt of a broken marriage, allowed me to reconnect with what truly mattered. The simplicity of living in the trailer, waking up to the sounds of birds, breathing fresh mountain air, and having the quiet to think and reflect, was something I didn't realize I needed. I've learned that sometimes, the world doesn't need to be complicated to be fulfilling. Ray has been a steady presence during this time, someone I never expected to rely on as much as I have. But in his own quiet way, he helped me find clarity. He gave me a perspective on life that I couldn't have gotten from anyone else. Ray never asked me about my past. He never pried into my personal life. Instead, he just let me be, offering me his support without expecting anything in return. It's rare to find people like that, people who understand the importance of space, of giving someone room to heal. He's not only become a good friend but someone I truly respect. In many ways, his life and attitude helped me figure out how I wanted to live my own. Then there's Rachel. I never expected to meet someone like her, especially not when I was still grieving the end of my marriage. But life has a funny way of surprising us, and I'm grateful for the connection we've built. Rachel isn't Emily, and that's the most important thing I've learned. She brings out a different side of me, a side that feels unburdened by the past. We don't rush into anything, but there's something beautiful in how we've allowed our relationship to grow naturally. There are no expectations, no pressures to be someone we're not. We simply enjoy each other's company, and I can already see that she's someone who could be a significant part of my life. It's not that I'm rushing into another marriage, not by any means. But the weight I carried for so long, the fear that I would never be able to trust anyone again, is slowly fading. I realize now that my ability to love again isn't tied to Emily's betrayal. I'm not doing this for anyone but myself. I'm opening up to the possibility of a new chapter, but on my terms. I've learned that it's okay to take things slow, to approach relationships with a healthy dose of caution but also with a willingness to embrace the future. I've also been reflecting on the lessons I've learned in the last year. First and foremost, I've learned that healing doesn't happen on anyone else's timeline but your own. I spent so much time in my marriage trying to please Emily, trying to make her happy while ignoring my own needs. But now I realize that putting myself first doesn't mean I'm being selfish. It means I'm taking responsibility for my own well-being. I've learned to trust myself again, to make decisions that are in my best interest, even if they don't align with the expectations others have of me. It's also become clear to me that not everyone is meant to stay in your life forever. Emily and I had good times, but those times were marred by the betrayal. I wanted to believe in the future we had planned, but the truth is, once trust is broken, it's nearly impossible to rebuild it. I don't regret walking away from that relationship. I've learned that it's okay to let go of something that isn't serving you, even if it's painful. Sometimes, in order to move forward, you have to leave things behind. Emily and I no longer communicate. I don't need closure from her. What I needed was to give myself permission to move on. The last few months have been full of changes, but with each passing day, I feel more certain about the path I'm on. My career is progressing and I'm working remotely more than ever, which gives me the flexibility I've always wanted. I've been able to focus on my physical health, running more often and even setting new personal goals for myself. I feel stronger both physically and mentally than I have in a long time. The man who once felt betrayed and broken has been replaced by someone who understands the power of resilience and self-care. As for my future, I'm not sure where it will lead, but I know one thing for certain. I'm not in a rush. I don't need to rush into another relationship or make major life decisions based on anyone's expectations but my own. I've learned that sometimes, the best thing you can do is simply live in the moment. The future will come when it's ready, and I'll be ready for it, not because I'm desperately trying to fill a void, but because I've learned to live my life on my terms. This is the first time in years that I truly feel like I'm in control of my life again. I've accepted the pain of the past, but I no longer let it define me. The journey from betrayal to healing hasn't been easy, but I've come to realize that the road to recovery is different for everyone. What matters is that I've taken steps to move forward, and in doing so, I've rediscovered a peace I never thought I'd find. As I sit here now, looking out over the hills from my trailer, I know I'm exactly where I need to be. My past no longer weighs me down. The future is uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to see what it holds. And that's enough for me. The key lesson from this story is the importance of self-respect, personal growth, and the power of letting go. Betrayal, especially in relationships, can leave deep emotional scars, but it's vital to recognize that healing begins from within. The narrator's journey teaches us that self-care and the courage to move on are essential for restoring peace and regaining control over one's life. It's important to understand that even when life feels shattered, we have the ability to rebuild it on our own terms. Trust, once broken, may not be easily restored, but it's not the end of the road. Sometimes, letting go of toxic relationships, even those we once held dear, is necessary for personal growth and emotional healing. We should never underestimate the power of self-reflection, living authentically, and creating space for new possibilities. Healing doesn't happen overnight, but with patience, reflection, and resilience, we can find peace again. No matter our age, it's never too late to regain control, redefine our happiness, and embrace a future full of opportunities. Life's challenges may seem overwhelming at times, but every step toward healing is a step toward freedom and self-discovery. Thank you so much for watching. If you found value in this video, go ahead and drop a 1 in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings on this story. How did it resonate with you? Don't forget to like the video, share it with anyone who might need to hear this message, and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Your support means the world to me, and it helps the channel grow so we can keep bringing you more insightful stories. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.